And good afternoon, and welcome once again to another edition of the Shadow Gallery. I am, as always, your host, James Donnelly, and today this is an interesting topic video that we'll be doing today in relation to if you subscribe to Howlermouse, which I highly suggest you do. He very recently did two videos in which it was basically a comparison contrast of basically comic books from today, from the current age of storytelling, to in this particular case he took the one video that I've watched so far took Justice League, Jeff Johns and Jim Lee's New 52 Justice League #1, and put it against Justice League of America issue from 1981. And again, this is, as he says, we don't want to be, kind of like the old man saying, oh, well, comic books were told better in my time, and, the comic books now suck. This isn't really the attack that's really being taken here, but to a certain respect it is. And this is, and I'm hoping, Howlermouse, that if you're watching this, that there's no offense in any of this. But to any of your opinions, the ideas that you posited on that on your vlog. So what I'm here to do is kind of give my own hypothesis on what exactly changed and what is, and if there is in fact a better time of storytelling. Now, I don't have examples with me because they're just going to kind of come out of my head as I speak. Obviously, the first and foremost thing that's going to be on my mind is going to be the comic books from now, having just, obviously read a lot of them from this week. So there are a couple major things that have changed a great deal over the course of, let's say between 1981 and 2012. So just, or just if you put it in 1982, in the last 30 years, there's been a lot of change. The thing that comes first and foremost to my mind is that really in 1989, 1990, you had the rise of the artist as superstar. The prices of comic books had kind of been growing steadily from throughout the 80s. They're kind of from they kind of started out at like 60 cents, and then it grew to 75, and then it grew to $1, and then by the end of the 90s we're at $1.25, $1.50. Depending upon the type of book that you were getting, if it, because you had kind of the more aged kind of kind of pulpy paper that was being used on most comic books at that time, then to a little bit more slicker, not prestige format, but something that was it was a little bit it was a little bit more colorful. And the pages, didn't lend themselves quite as well to wear. A lot of them started kind of losing that kind of dull white, page kind of background, and just became, kind of just a nicer, kind of a nicer feel. So there was that, but you also had, like I said, you had the, with artists like Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld and Eric Larson. Basically kind of all in Mark Silvestri, all kind of, in my opinion, Whilce Portacio, all kind of aping each other's style, in my opinion. And this gave birth ultimately to what would be, Image Comics. And, Image basically was saying, they were willing to pay exorbitant amounts of money to the artists there so they could keep them kind of contractually on the side of whatever comic that they were working on. Well, the artists kind of said, some of the creators said, okay, enough of this, we want to go and form our own company. And Image, for the longest time, was exactly that. It was Image. It was style over substance. It was a lot of the superstar artists doing some very lovely artwork and doing some really bad comics. Now, so that, because if we look at, let's say, for instance, one of my favorite artists of all time, one of the few that I've actually said in my mind, okay, I need to go to Hero Initiative and help this person, is Gene Colan. Now, Gene Colan would never be what you would consider to be a superstar artist, but this is a man who did some of the most definitive artwork of the 60s and 70s, and working well into the 80s, and even coming back every now and then to do art. And he became more of the kind of the elder statesman of comics rather than the superstar artists. Same with Jack Kirby. If you look at, you just look at the, you look at the checks that they've got. They got paid basically kind of on a per page basis, as opposed, for basically just enough to live on. Really, there were no benefits. There's no nothing, and that really hurt a lot of those artists from that era. So it's just, which is why they had to eventually turn to the Hero Initiative, or people would turn to the Hero Initiative for them in order to help for them to pay for, in, Gene Colan's initial case was his eyes, and just kind of in general, kind of, to help out their standard of living. These are guys that we grew up with reading or grew up with looking at, and and that was more of a thing. And I would really, Brian Augustyn, who is one of my buddies at the to Gotham City Comics and Coffee, I'd really like to get kind of his take on this and what he feels about this, because I know he's worked in the business for decades, and so he's seen a lot of the greats. He's seen them come and go. He has internal stories from DC, and so I'd like to actually get him on film kind of talking about this, but if wishes were horses. So so again, you had these artists making big money, so it eventually became more about, we're going to put as much art as we can on this page, but it's kind of a more, it became more splash page heavy. It was a lot of, striking poses and whatnot, and you just had this, this feeling of, well, it might be a little bit more absorbing from an art standpoint, but it doesn't quite hit the hammer home. Now, also within and before this period, I should even say, is that you had the rise of very specific sequential storytelling. And obviously, all comics are serialized in one sense or another, but in throughout the 70s and throughout the 80s, you had one-offs were the norm, or you would get one or two issues that would be, okay, well, this is, we're going to leave you in kind of a cliffhanger here, and we're going to pick up next issue. But many of the comics were one-offs. They were just, okay, here's this here's this story. Here's, character, conflict, resolution. You had the 3 acts, and it was done. And it was all done in one issue. And then, I think in this, kind of started really in the 70s with a lot of focus on, just for instance, like people like Frank Miller, kind of bringing in this very sequential storytelling style in which, okay, well, you had to get every issue in order to find out what was going to happen next. And that's, kind of a generalization. His run on Daredevil in this, in the late 70s and the early 80s, and going even further than that, had very sequential storytelling, in which, it is almost, it was almost necessary to pick it up week after week, not just because you loved the character or loved the title or loved the, the creator, but because you had to find out what happened next. And, serial storytelling is nothing new, obviously. It harkens back to, long, long ago. The 1800s had, serialized storytelling. So, I mean, this is, the Bible has serialized storytelling. So, I mean, this is not a new idea. But it really became prevalent once other companies started to see that, hey, this is a really successful way that we can make more money off of our and keep people dedicated to a particular character by continuing to tell a sequential serialized story. And so they'll keep picking up the book, keep picking up the book, so we can see how this cliffhanger resolves itself. And I mean, obviously, Alan Moore really stepped into that fray, and made for instance, just his work on his work on Swamp Thing is very serialized. I mean, in most comics of that time, you had, okay, well, here's a little, as Howlermouse was kind of pointing out, read, for more information on this villain or this character or this hero, whatever, read, Action Comics issue, whatever. But that was it. Basically, you still had a little bit of an overview as to who they were and what they did and what their powers were, and that was it. It was done. You were done. So you could eliminate that exposition in less than a page usually, because there were a lot. For that time, there were a lot more panels. There were a lot more panels, I think, that are being used now. And so, that's, and that's really something that we have. That is the, serialized storytelling is the norm right now. In order to pick up one book, you have to, if it's a story that you like, you have to keep picking up that book. It seems that you can get them month to month. It's kind of half and half right now. There's about 50% that I think that you could easily get month to month and not feel like, okay, well, this will only work really in trade. Well, that's what you see a lot of right now, is that many comic books seem to be designed for the sole purpose of selling trades, because trades didn't exist in the 70s and in the 80s, really. I mean, you had maybe one or two, but you had more of, Marvel's graphic novel series, Epic, things like that. And then, like I said, you had, obviously coming out of DC, you had, Dark Knight Returns, 4 parts, 4 issues for Batman Year One, but it was told within the Batman title, 404 to 407. But, again, a lot of the Batman comics that I grew up with, a lot of Spider-Man comics that I grew up with, so on and so forth, a lot of them were one-offs. It was just, one and done. That was it. You know, occasionally there'd be two-parters, occasionally there'd be three-parters, but none of them were, you know, because trades are another source of income right now. And, you know, the comics industry did kind of eat itself in the 90s. I mean, you have Marvel Comics, the company that sold 1 million issues of one issue, you know, over 1 million copies of X-Men #1 by, you know, Claremont and Lee. You know, that's pretty much a record that has not been, you know, tied or, you know, anywhere close since. So, and I'm sure that there's somebody dying to correct me out there if I'm wrong. So I think that I might be, but anyway, it's beside the point. Yeah, the air is on, it's daytime, deal with it. Okay, so you have those, you know, so you really have those two things, the superstar artists, the sequential, you know, serialized storytelling, and, God damn it, there's a third thing. I am kind of shooting from the hip here, in the sense that, you know, there were a lot of things that I thought really hard about, you know, kind of these, you know, these 2 or 3 really big points. And, you know, I think really the third one is the fun aspect. Now, I got into not a debate, but it was more of like, I posted a review on Amazon a long time, you know, 2 years ago, of Ed Brubaker's, you know, his initial run on Captain America, basically the Winter Soldier arc. And, you know, someone had posted on this review just recently, so someone had actually gone and, you know, read that review, or just was so incensed because they were saying that actual arc was the reason they stopped reading comics, because they had not only they had revived Bucky, you know, that it brought him back from, you know, the collective belief of being dead. He never, you know, it was never obviously explicitly said, well, he's dead. But, I mean, you thought for the last, you know, 60 years, well, it's pretty obvious. I mean, you know, he was on a bomb, the bomb blew up. And, you know, obviously Brubaker retooled that to the point, you know, to the sense that, okay, well, he didn't die. And that he, you know, this guy really looked at him as being a kind of a bloodthirsty, almost, you know, assassin type when he was Bucky, not as an advanced scout. And basically, you know, yes, he was trained to kill. He was a soldier through and through. You know, this was what they did. He got in, he cut throats to get in silently to make the primary assault. So, I mean, this was something that we did not see of Bucky before then. And again, this kind of goes back to the maturation of comic book storytelling versus fun. And this is what he was saying, was that it's almost impossible, was his words, not mine, to go into a comic book store now and pick up a comic book that's fun. Obviously, I had much different opinions about this guy than he did, because you know, there are, you know, as you said, you know, I want to take my 5-year-old into a comic book shop and not have to dig through back issues in order to find something fun for him to read. I want to show him something that's being put out now that's fun and that's kid friendly, and, you know, that, you know, because that's why most of us in our community, all of us putting out these videos right now, we were fans from an early age. You know, we didn't become fans in our teens and, you know, our 20s and 30s, whatever. You know, we're older. You know, most of us are older, and we've been following comic books since, you know, probably the 70s or at least the 80s. And yes, we do realize that there was probably more fun to be had, but that is also at the same time, by the same token, when people were saying, well, comic books are just for kids. And of course, they've been saying that. They still say that. But, you know, even, you know, David Cronenberg, one of my favorite directors of all time, came out kind of speaking out against, not against, but just not really understanding, saying that, The Dark Knight Rises, I mean, it's still just a guy, still a guy in a cape, going around and punching people, that it appeals to the adolescent mind. So the people who are calling this high art, and this is kind of paraphrasing, the people that call, these movies high art, I don't think they really know what the fuck they're talking about, is what he said. And, and I love David Cronenberg. It's like, lighten the fuck up, man. I thought it was, because, I thought it was just kind of it stank of sour grapes a little bit. But anyway, he's still a man that knows his shit, and, obviously he adapted a comic book into a film, but that's, much more adult comic book, A History of Violence, and actually made it better than the comic. But anyway, I'm straying away from the point here. But what's going on, what's gone on, is that the people who grew up with comics in the 60s and in the 70s and in the 80s, they're the writers now. They're the artists. And they were reading them just like we were throughout that time period. And then all of a sudden there was Dark Knight Returns. There was Watchmen. Time Magazine was writing about Dark Knight Returns. And it was, it was the first, and then they released it in trade paperback, and it was like the first trade paperback to make the New York Times bestseller list. So, I mean, this kind of storytelling not only appealed to people who could easily dismiss comic books as being just for kids, and then also, obviously 1986 also was Watchmen, so, that didn't get as much play, because it wasn't a recognizable character. There was no TV show from the 60s based on the Watchmen, or just Watchmen, because they're never the Watchmen, but you know what I mean. And, so it wasn't, they weren't characters that were ingrained on the, the pop culture psyche. Everybody knows who Batman is. No, you ask, if you were asked in 1986, if you were to ask, if you were asked 10 people, no, forget it. If you asked 1,000 people who the Question was, or Blue Beetle, or Captain Atom, you would get maybe one person might know. And I'm not talking about comic fans, I'm talking about just people in general. But everybody knows who Batman is, okay? So that's just, okay. And so they grew up with, so the writers, artists now, they grew up with that kind of storytelling. Or they grew up with the earlier sort of storytelling, and then, like us, saw the shift in storytelling style and said, this strikes me a lot more as the type of stuff that I would like to write than the stuff that, I saw before. So, I mean, that's what we have right now. I mean, everything and like he was comparing it to, to rock, to music. Now, I mean, there's going to be garbage out there. Like I personally consider, Justice League to be not offensive, but I mean, it's certainly not a good book at all right now, because it is just, but that, because, I mean, even the fact that it is just kind of like, that it's very sparse, it does nothing to really establish the specifics of character. It's much more about the art, and it's much more about, okay, well, Jeff Johns is in his sandbox, and he's got all the characters that he wants to play with, so I'm just going to play with them, and I'm going to put them here and there and wherever, and, we're going to get ultimately I'm going to get to just play and have fun with these characters. And that's why this title has always bothered me, is because that's all it feels like. It feels like it's just, I'm playing with these characters, I'm having some fun with them, and that's it. You know, I don't have an agenda or a real story in mind other than to just just to show, okay, well, this is how they meet, okay, and then now they're fighting somebody new, and it's just it's dreck. It really is. And then you've got Jim Lee doing these 2-page splash pages and these 1-page splash pages to really get his money's worth, because he's being paid a lot of money to draw this comic, because he's Jim Lee. He's a really terrific artist. But because there are comics that are still fun out there, and Justice League, I would say, it's fine as far as, if you don't want anything of substance, it might be just fine for a new reader to come in and say, okay, this is kind of fun, even a young person. And I'm sure they'll love looking at the pages. I mean, because the art is really, it's very eye-popping. The colors are very vivid. Obviously, the computer separation that they're doing right now, very few things are being done by hand, as far as the color is concerned. And, you would show them something from the 1970s or 1980s, or the 50s or the 50s or 60s, and they would think, well, this is terribly antiquated. Much like people who would look at people who listen right now to. See, I don't listen to music. I don't generally listen to like popular music, but people who let's say, listen to like LMFAO right now, and if you played for them, "Love Me Do" by the Beatles, they said, this fucking sucks, man. I mean, there's no this, there's no that. Again, popular music, I mean, again, the same thing as, not so much rock and roll, but just popular music in general, there's always going to, and comic books, and literature of all kind, there's going to be bubblegum, and there's going to be the more alternative, and I don't even want to say alternative, but progressive, or college, but just more sophisticated music. But again, sophistication seems to be coming, it seems to be, people are more reaching for that than they were before, in my opinion. And again, you have very serialized storytelling right now. For the most part, on pretty much every book that's out right now, you don't have a superstar artist, but you've got a really good artist. I would say that we're probably we're probably never going to call, let's say, Chris Samney a superstar artist, or Marcos Martin would be a superstar artist, or Sean Martinborough, or Doug Mankey, or what I'm saying, Andrea Sorrentino, Yannick Paquette, Marco Rudy. I mean, these are not people that you would call superstars, like a Jim Lee or like a Todd McFarlane, or they're just, they don't really have too many of those anymore. But they're really good artists. And they are better than, I won't say better than, because it's just a different style. I mean, J.H. Williams, he, again, not superstar, but everybody knows what a brilliant artist he is. And, just the way that they play with, that they play with panels, but I mean, that's Will Eisner's had been doing that shit in the 40s. So I mean, this is, it's nothing new. It's just when it's reintroduced to us, we think, oh my God, this is so new. But we don't look back far enough. But but yes, I mean, there were simpler stories. They were very dialogue heavy. I mean, if you look at, the works of, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, obviously this is classic comic storytelling, but I mean, if you were to compare it to something that came out now as far as levels of sophistication, not on art, because Kirby's a fucking master, but, if you compare Stan Lee's writing to that of Alan Moore's, or, even, let's just kind of go, not quite as, not respected, but not quite as highbrow. Let's say, just someone like Ed Brubaker. It's miles and miles and miles apart, because, a lot of those, it was speechifying, and it was soliloquies, and it was, I'm going to talk about what I'm doing to no one the way that nobody does. And right now you have, obviously, I mean, I think it's really the 70s that changed everything, because 70s popular culture, you had, obviously, the rise of, this whole new level of filmmakers, these whole new, acting styles and everything like that. And that did kind of start in the 60s, but it became a lot more prevalent in the 70s. It became a lot more commercially successful. People started speaking in more naturalistic styles. People started making more naturalistic films. And they were very successful. They were cultural phenomenons. And this really helped shape what our comics and all of our literature eventually would become. Because, if you read classic literature, and I'm not talking about Shakespeare here, but just like stuff like, let's say, Dracula. I mean, that is, people don't talk like that. People don't write like that. And I'm sure that they didn't at the time. So, to have, these, and then, so, like I said, I mean, it's the same thing with, with Stan Lee as a writer. That you have, basically, okay, well, I'm just, I'm narrating what I'm doing because it's important that people understand what I'm doing, that the kids that are out there understand what my character is capable of doing. I just think of Dr. Doom. I thought it was lovely. I don't know if anybody had done this before, but it was not in the first, but the second Superman-Spider-Man meeting, the one that had Dr. Doom and the Parasite as the villains. Dr. Doom, he is walking around soliloquying, walking around his castle, his embassy in New York City, and he's just speaking out loud about his master plans. And then kind of a servant comes in, and he's like, make sure to transcribe the recording of the soliloquy that I just made. So I mean, it was that in and of itself, I thought was just brilliant, the way that they actually turned that idea on its head. The fact that he is speechifying and talking to nobody, but he actually, because he's Dr. Doom, he actually records himself doing it. So, I mean, that's, that was a trip. I mean, when I reread that recently, I'm just like, that's awesome. That's just brilliant. I love that idea. But yeah, I mean, so you have basically these three things. You have, you have the, like I said, the superstar artists, you have the serialized storytelling, and you have, in general, you have the more mature style of storytelling than there was during a simpler time. Because as we know, our world is very complicated. So it would be, there are comics that are, I mean, you can escape into any of them. I mean, I'm not saying that one is more, that one is more easy to escape in than the other, but that's really only if you're a fan of comics. If you are, a comics geek like me, yourself, whoever, you know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, essentially that we, most of us, like I said, we're in our 30s or 40s, and or are probably our mid to late 20s, and we've been reading comic books for a long time, and or we're just or people who are just very interested in the art of comic book storytelling. We know more of its history. We know more. We know more about it now than we would have then. I mean, that's just fact. There's just much more access to information now than there was in the 70s or the 80s, or even the early parts of the 90s. So I guess the thing to take away is this: better, worse. Our current era of storytelling now, to me, is very exciting, because it can literally go anywhere, and anyone can do anything. Nothing is out of bounds, nothing is off limits, they don't have to obey the comic code. That, to me, is very, very, very exciting. And it's made, when I look to the comics of the past, I find them mostly extremely entertaining. They're really fun reads. And there's nothing bad about the fact that they lack substantive, emotional impact. Some of them do. Some of them really are very powerful. I mean, obviously, things like the death of Gwen Stacy, just as an example, or even just, in those first few moments when, Joe Chill is shooting, Bruce Wayne's parents. This will shut you up. So I mean, it's always been based on this very powerful storytelling, but obviously in that time, it was much simpler. It was done in like 2 frames, and that was it. They're done in 2 panels, and that was, and you were done telling that story. So I guess my point is, I can't say that any one period is better than the other. Obviously, the price is, it's a real sticking point for a lot of people, because I think because of the almost unbelievable amount of money that some artists and writers are getting paid for the work that they do. It's, I appreciate the fact that they are selling on, a pretty massive scale, the real, the superstars of writing right now, like Bendis, like Brubaker, like, Dan Slott, like, I could, Scott Snyder, I mean, I don't even know how much. I don't think Scott Snyder is getting paid as much as people like Brubaker or Bendis, but he should be. So I guess really my point being is that I don't think that any one era is necessarily, one is bad and one is good. That it's just, I think that things on the whole have both gotten better and gotten worse. But if you look at, like I said, if you look at the comics from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you've got some very poor storytelling from that era as well. But you have these favorite characters. And why are they favorites of ours? Because they were characters that we connected with as children. So I think that's, the love of comics should be born out of adolescence, like the point that David Cronenberg was made. And I think that, obviously the marketing people, everybody, involved in this, they recognize that. And they exploit that. But I also think it's just the stories that most people want to tell now. And like I said, there are exceptions out there, absolutely. I don't think that Geoff Johns is out there trying to tell a story within the confines of Justice League that is that is so much a story that he wants to tell rather than a commodity to sell. So that, like I said, there are things that are better and there are things that are worse than they used to be. And but let's face it, it's always been, nobody has ever, gotten to the business of comics and said, well, I'm just in this to make people happy. No, they do it because it's a job. And the job, dictates what they do. So, again, I can't fault any one person or any one era or this or that. Like I said, all comic books from all times have their highs and their lows. And, I think that's really the crux of it. I don't think that, and again, this is not even necessarily what Howlermouse is saying. So I want to reiterate that I'm not disagreeing with anything in specific. I'm not even countering your argument. This is just a response. This is just my own feeling because you inspired me to do this. So, I really enjoyed what you had to say. I thought it was very interesting, and like I said, this is the kind of stuff I've been like sitting on because I was, I saw it for the first time last night, and I'd been, thinking about it like as I was going to sleep, and then I woke up, and then I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about it again. So, if anything that you could take away from this is that just one person's idea, like Howlermouse's in this particular instance, can inspire you to talk for 40 odd minutes and tell people what you think, why things have changed, and whether or not you think those changes are for the better or for the worse. Or whether you think it's basically just the same, it just costs more. I think that's the crux of the argument. It's the same, it just costs more money. So, anyway, thanks to Howlermouse for really stirring up a lot of not controversy, certainly, but for stirring up some inspiration, getting that hamster wheel cranking in my mind, so that I could come out here and spew my and spew my thoughts on this subject. So that's it for now. Stay tuned. I'm thinking about doing another video at some point over the weekend, and of course, prior to my new comics bitches on Monday. So if this is your first time here, of course, please subscribe. And if it's not, thanks for coming back. And thumb it up, thumb it down, comment, criticize, complain. Put your own opinions, put your own thoughts. Think about making your own video, and put it up on the tube. Subscribe to me, I'll subscribe to you, and if I already subscribe to you, go ahead and do it anyway. Because I think this is a really good discussion to have. And I think it's really important, and I think that ultimately it will all help us see things a little bit more clearly. So, thank you to Howlermouse for doing what you do. You're always smart guy, and always have some really, really, really interesting things to say. So, thanks again for coming. And again, this is James Donnelly from the Shadow Gallery, reminding you to stay in the shadows. Doesn't really work as well in the daytime. Okay.